researching UFOs for over 30 years, what is your best assessment about what is the greater truth of the UFO phenomena?
The greater truth. Wow. I mean, I decided to specialize in two things after being exposed to the wide berth of ufology in UFO crashes and government documents. And that's sort of where I decided to spend my time. There's lots of great people doing wonderful work and experiencers and abductions and lights in the sky and video analysis. And there's a whole milieu of interesting topics. But the ones that excited me was unquestionable proof. What was the hardware? What's the technology? What's the stuff I can dig out of the ground? What are the things I can authenticate from the government documents? And that was what motivated and excited me. So the my assessment and truths today is, there's lots of crashed hardware. The government's recovered it. They've reverse engineered it, and they've been using it to their own benefit or military's benefit and not to the benefit of humanity. And so we've been second fiddle and dismissed or not important to the advantages of uh, these celestial gifts, so to speak, that
Mm,
have arrived from the cosmos.
mm. I hear that. Have you ever seen a UFO or a non human being?
Um, no, no. However, I was driving back from college where I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, past Vandenberg Air Force Base, and saw a light in the sky that was moving erratically, no missing time. I went home. I filed a MUFON report. This is maybe 1977 or something like that.
Mm,
Might be 78, might be 76. I have to go check the database, but nothing, um, nothing stunning.
okay, cool. Yeah, maybe we'll tell you another time, but I've had two sightings, very brief, but very distinct. So
Mhm.
interesting. So, in your view, what is something that most people who are interested in the UFO subject are missing or overlook?
Um, Missing or overlooked? Well, if you were to ask me that question, 15 years ago, I would say UFO crashes
Mm,
and the evidence in documents. But now with Grush and congressional testimony, much more of the world has come up to the belief that, oh yeah, well, we really probably do have crashed hardware and extraterrestrial bodies. Um,
mm.
so it's hard to say what there's so many different ways you can go with that question. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, and you hit on a really great point. If it wasn't for maybe the events of the last year, that might still be the thing that everyone's missing. And even myself, I've just really quickly, I always was interested kind of, but I never thought there was anything real to it. I always associated with like the Twilight Zone show and like cool like 1950s sci-fi, and I was open. I was like, yeah, there's probably aliens, there's probably stuff. But then when I finally read a book, it was actually Philip Corso's book. That's
Hmm.
when it hit me, and I was like, hold on a second, this is like real. And now it's been about 3 years of serious research, and yeah, even up to like a little bit before Grush, I was just getting to that point personally, and then it was now that's what I think I would have overlooked. Like it's not just that they're real, it's that there's this whole other thing. And I think like you said, people are probably starting to come to terms with that now and think about that.
Yeah, well, starting with Day After Roswell from Corso was a good choice, and that gives you a nice broad section of the government cover up and the importance and his firsthand experiences with an ET saying, turn off the what's in it for me, and the ET said a better world if you can handle it or something to that effect. And I thought that was very prescient and on point. I think he turned off the radar and the craft left. Um,
Yeah, it's a fascinating book. I highly recommend to anyone listening.
Yeah.
The Day After Roswell by Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso. So in that book, he actually mentions this, and this kind of leads into more about your work. And what I want to ask you about is, can you clarify, maybe for people that haven't heard of it before too, what Majestic 12 is, and what is the difference between Majestic 12 and the Majestic Documents?
Um, well, Majestic 12 was formed by an order of Truman in 1947, along with the Atomic Energy Commission and the CIA. Um, they all started then. Um,
Mm.
you don't know if they're all interconnected, but maybe they are. So, um, Majestic 12 is the control group or the effort to maintain and investigate this top secret research and development organization. Uh, that's their focus: research and development and exploitation of these crashed craft. Um, the other term, top secret Majic, MAJIC, that stands for Military Assessment of the Joint Intelligence Committee. So it's an acronym, and it's in one of the leaked Majestic documents. Uh, but I guess the most important thing people need to remember about the Majestic documents is there's some 3,500 pages that have leaked over the course of like 18 years from 7 different sources, and some are stunningly powerful, typeset, authentic, been researched to death, and others are less amenable to research, and it's hard to verify the details. But I've spent a lot of time in the National Archives around Colonel Corso, for example,
Mm.
where
Wow.
well, can I find the documents that he was working on and the organizations he was in, the Foreign Technology Office?
Mm.
Are there records there that might prove um, a UFO association or reverse engineering association?
Right. And did you find anything on that
Oh,
specifically?
yeah, we found a lot of material that's sort of orthogonal and but no smoking guns. Um, but I am reminded of I think it was Ocasio Cortez's question in the UAP.
Mm.
Uh, you know, if you were me, where would I look? Names of programs and so forth. And I thought to myself, well, if I was answering that question, I would say Record Group 341, Entry 47, Box 22.
Mm.
Uh, and in that particular case, I can't remember the exact phrasing. There was, a memo that alluded to crashed alien bodies that are so bizarre in a forthcoming top secret memo. Um, and this is related to psychological warfare. It was from the military to Robley Evans, who's an MIT professor.
Mm.
Um, so there are many examples like that where there's withdrawal slips or things are missing.
Mm.
Uh,
Very
but
interesting.
there's a lot of evidence in the National Archives.
Yeah, I would like to make a trip there myself. I might do that this summer. Very cool. So I want to ask you some questions about your work with the Majestic Documents. Before we get there, I want to ask you real quick. Why do you think that the UFO field seems to be divided about the authenticity of Majestic 12? At least in my experience, I've seen people go either way. And why do you think that is?
Well, um, I think we haven't done a good enough job of explaining it, and certainly there's confusion, and there's some documents that are difficult to verify and hence create doubt. Um, And then there's other documents such as the Special Operations Manual, Extraterrestrial Entities, Technology Recovery and Disposal, that the provenance is well investigated by me, as well as the contents and the details and the evidence is very strong in that case. Um, or something like the Einstein Oppenheimer uh, memo, or 4-page memo, 5 pages, about relationships with celestial beings, I think is the
Yeah, I
is
just
the,
read that very recently, and I
yeah,
was like,
inhabitants with,
wow, fascinating.
yeah, yeah, within celestial relationships with inhabitants of celestial bodies. And people say, "Oh, it's a fake." There's all this they misspelled celestial. I mean, come on.
Typewriters, right? You know,
Yeah, I mean, and what they don't really realize is that, was Einstein dictating it to his secretary in English or German? You know, it's all, did they want to retype it? It was sensitive and top secret. It is what it is. They just typed it and passed it along. Um,
mm,
but we had a forensic linguistics expert, Dr. Carol Chowsky. She's a $300 an hour lawyer that shows up in court and testifies about document authenticity.
wow.
And she went through and did her whole computerized analysis and said, we gave her examples of um, Einstein's writing and Oppenheimer's writing and Tim Cooper's writing, which is where it sort of leaked from,
Mm,
and had her compare, and said, well, she concluded that, yeah, it's clearly Einstein that wrote this, not
mm.
Oppenheimer. I mean, his name was probably lent to it. So that's probably an example of where people at first blush say, BS.
Yeah,
Um, they don't want to dig in or talk about it in more detail. But the majesticdocuments.com website has it all there. So you can go look at it. You can, people write me questions all the time, or so I'm happy to explain what I know about it.
awesome. Yeah, I definitely encourage the listeners to go check out majesticdocuments.com, right? And this is over 3,500 documents. My question was, you've studied these, you and your dad, you've analyzed them, you've done your very best to verify to what degree you find them to be authentic, right? And so what's your biggest takeaway after all that work? How would you boil it down to a something?
um, that there's clearly a crash retrieval program.
Mm,
Uh, it's clearly super secret, and they need to hide it at all expense, particularly back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and it just kept going because of the war and the Soviets. Um, the military advantage was uh, real and potential, and uh,
mm,
in, so I guess my takeaway is that they're hiding a tremendously valuable program for their military benefit rather than humanity's benefit.
got you. What of all these documents, is there one that you found to just be the most strange and
Strange.
yeah, just an outlier or just something very different and
Hmm. That's a fascinating question. I would say one of the strangest ones is the Einstein Oppenheimer document, in that it's sort of a think piece about how do we have relationships with ETs? What sort of legal framework should we have? Um, the other documents are straightforward military commands and
okay.
how-to programs, and where to take the bodies and so forth. It's far more practical
Mm,
rather than contemplative.
mm,
Um, and so that's the one that's probably the most chin stroking. Um, it makes you think about it more. Sort of the way the AI ufologist, the way I put that together, to ask a series of questions where the answers are, wow, I
mhm,
haven't thought about that perspective of why the ETs might be here.
right. Yeah, and that's what I found to be the most valuable in your book. I just finished reading that and I want to get into that soon here. And to the Oppenheimer Einstein memo, Yeah, it's fascinating. And actually, I just read that a couple weeks ago. Stumbled on it actually in a book by Daniel Salter,
Oh, yeah.
and I was like, "What?" And I was on the beach, and I was like, it was fascinating to read that. It felt authentic to me, and as you're explaining it to me, there's a lot to corroborate that it was authentic. But
Yeah.
before we move off of the Majestic Documents a bit here and the Majestic 12, I did want to ask you your opinion on an individual who was listed as being part of MJ12, and I've always took a intrigue into his story. And that's the first U.S. Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal. He was listed as a member of MJ12. He died by falling out of a window at the Bethesda Naval Hospital in 1949. It was officially ruled a suicide, but declassified documents released 55 years later showed that the official story didn't add up. And so in ufology, I've noticed it's been a rumor that he was assassinated because of what he knew about the UFO ET reality, and he was supposedly about to tell the public. What's your opinion on this? Have you found any evidence to substantiate this idea?
Well, in the Majestic Documents in the first annual report, there's a comment that the death of Forrestal was necessary and regrettable. Um,
Mm,
uh, so that's the evidence in the Majestic Documents. I actually got Forrestal's FBI file. Um, I filed for it, I don't know how long ago, but it's, I don't know, 50, 60 pages or so.
mm,
Um, and in it, it's clear that the FBI was tapping his phones, monitoring his conversations. Um, he did a fair amount of drinking. He was at times psychologically challenged or unstable, according to the FBI agents. Um, but maybe that's not a reason to kill him, but maybe it is. So I, I suppose that James Jesus Angleton and the counterintelligence people of the time and the control group um, said, this secret is just so important, we can't avoid a leak at the time. Um, or maybe he, went off the rails at a meeting and just said, I'm going to go tell them. I'm just speculating. I don't really know the answer, but the the FBI files clearly indicate that he drank a lot and that he was maybe depressed or challenged or psychologically disturbed.
okay, gotcha. Wanted to ask you about one more. Roscoe Hillenkotter. He was the first director of the CIA. He was also listed as an MJ12 member. After his retirement, he was on the board of a civilian UFO research group, NICAP, and he went on the record saying UFOs were real and that the truth was being withheld from the public. And from your study, what's your take on him? Anything?
Um, I really haven't studied him much,
Okay.
but I think that he was keeping a tabs on NICAP by being on the board,
Mm,
um, and what they were doing and staying in touch with that. It brings up the another book that I've been dying to do, or maybe somebody can volunteer to help me with it. It's the personnel of MJ12 or uh, the details. I mean, I have a Excel file of I don't know 75 people that have been linked in various times to Majestic 12, and then writing up a bio about each one and their linkage to the UFO field, trying to pull primary sources in, um, would be very, I think, enlightening for people to say. And there's big people like Hillenkotter or Forrestal, et cetera, but then there's really strange ones like Captain Buchanan, who's on the White Hot Report, uh, or Charles Ethan Ray, who did an autopsy of an alien with Dietlif Bronk. And there
mm,
are lesser known characters that their children are still alive, their grandchildren are still alive. you could find them and interview them, and there's loads of potential research that could be fascinating.
I love that, and we'll have to talk after. I definitely would be interested in volunteering and
Okay,
helping out
cool.
with that. Yeah. So awesome. Well, moving now on to your book, which was there was an older original version. This is a new one you just updated it and it came out with Magic Eyes Only. What is this book about, and what made you write it?
Well, it's all about UFO crashes, some 104 crashes from around the world from 1897 to present. Uh, and I updated many of the case files that are in there and added more that were around. I wrote the original book in 2005 at the request of one of the participants in the UFO Crash Retrieval Symposia that I sponsored in Las Vegas. So from 2003 to 2009, I had 7 crash retrieval conferences in Las Vegas. Um, and it was the start of many of the people of ufology today, from Nick Pope to Dolan to Linda Moulton Howe. Not that you know, I just helped everybody along,
Mhm.
um, gave them an opportunity to speak and share their stories. And I just focused on what was bugging me, which was I wanted to see high quality cases of hardware oriented, um, investigations and crash investigations. So that was what motivated me to write it originally. And then with, Grush's testimony last summer, and I felt like only I could do the update. And so I just, in November, I just got to do this. And I actually have another, 5 or so crash cases on my desk because I just wanted to get it done. Um, and so there's more to report, and there's a lot more to investigate. I mean, most of these cases are sort of in a neutral position. They aren't particularly authentic or particularly uh, weak, and they need more research to push the needle of authenticity up higher or lower.
Right. And yeah, that's what I love about the book is for each case there's a visual kind of meter of how likely you find it to be authentic, and that's a
Yeah,
really cool feature. So,
and
yeah.
and the way I did that is I looked at scoring each case, and it was based on um, the provenance. For example, where did the story come from, or where did the documents come from? Do you have any physical evidence? Uh, do you have any multiple investigators investigating for a long time? The witness quality and depth. Are there any what I call zingers or obscure facts that no faker in the right mind could uh, conjure up, so to speak,
Mm.
and all that goes to the authenticity rating. Roswell is naturally very high because there's got documents, you got multiple investigators, you got a very long time,
Mhm.
and it survives the test of time. Where other cases are just sort of a single newspaper article that seems intriguing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love how you put it all out there because you never know. You follow a trail, could become the meter could go up a lot higher. So it's a great
Yeah,
work. Yeah.
and in one case, well, one of our cases went down this year because of the work of other researchers.
Yeah, and it's a really great piece, and it just goes to show how this has been sort of not at the forefront of the UFO subject for many decades. I didn't even hear about Leonard Stringfield until late, and then I'm like, what? And now you've kind of continued and built on Leonard Stringfield's work, so it's really
Mm-hmm.
awesome. I wanted to ask you, of all these cases, you have 103, right?
Or
Which
four,
104?
four.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which one do you feel is the most bulletproof and likely to be 100% true?
Well, it's Roswell.
Roswell.
Um, the one that I personally investigated and I'm the primary investigator on um, was the Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 1941 crash,
Mm.
um, where I interviewed Charlotte Mann, who's the granddaughter of Reverend Huffman, that was asked to provide blessings to 3 dead aliens, and the military swept it all away. And that's the usual sort of case story of all of them, so to speak. Is somebody observes it, lands, crashes, and intact or not intact, bodies or no bodies, and then the military takes it all away. But in the case of Cape Girardeau, just to let people know the types of investigative approaches that I've used, um, which people say, well, how do you investigate a UFO crash? So in that case, I went to the fire station logs for Cape Girardeau to see when the fire trucks went out there, at a date and time. That's the sort of critical thing, is when precisely did it happen and where precisely did it happen? Um, I interviewed Charlotte Mann. I went to the Baptist church. I did aerial photography comparisons between 1939 and 1943 to find out where it might have crashed within the 15-minute radius. So you end up doing investigative journalist type work, to find out what more can you learn to prove it up. So that's one that I enjoyed, and then passed it on to Paul Blake Smith, who wrote the whole book, Missouri 41.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's a fascinating case. 1941, obviously, it's significant because it's before Roswell, it's earlier. And got another question about early cases in a minute, but I wanted to ask you, of all these cases, which one do you find to be the most bizarre or unique?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I can pinpoint one. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. That you stumped me. That's good.
That's fair. That's fair. I'll have to ask you another time. So I wanted to see, can you tell us a little bit about this 1897 UFO crash retrieval? This is fascinating to me. I've actually happened to read a decent amount of research into the airships of 1897, which is fascinating enough, but then I hear about a crash retrieval. And what could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is really the work of Jim Mars, actually, who is the wrote the foreword to the book, the original book, and I kept it in for the second edition.
Hmm.
And he was a Dallas news reporter, Dallas Morning News, um, and he did the primary investigations around that. There was a a little stone tribute in the cemetery to this little alien that was buried there. And then, of course, there's a plaque uh, put up by the Texas state, a historical marker. The body disappeared from the grave in the 70s sometime, as I recall.
Hmm.
And there's some other pictures and radioactivity in the area at the time. Um, so I just find it interesting, and there's a lot of there's somebody else that wrote a book on airships. I want to say um, Noe or uh, Ular, Ularte,
Hmm.
Ruben Ularte,
Hmm.
um, that talked about cowboys and aliens or something like that.
Hmm. Yeah, that movie maybe wasn't just a random idea, like a lot of the movies probably aren't. you know,
Right.
um, that's really interesting. I think it's important for us to go back further because might give us more context. It might not be as simple as 1940s, and then that's what happened. Of course, it definitely seems like it increased. Then, one case I wanted to ask you about your take on real quick is the 1942, known as the Battle of L.A., and there was alleged crash retrievals of UFOs by the Navy and the Army. I know you studied this. I read about it a bit in your book. What's your opinion on that one?
Yeah. Well, the the documents say that the either being shot down or crashed, I believe, by these proximity fuses and or deliberately. But one went into the ocean and the Navy recovered it, and one went into the mountains of San Bernardino and the Army recovered it. Um, and it's interesting to note that the San Bernardino Mountains is where Tim Cooper lived, and one of his primary sources that leaked many of the Majestic documents, presumably was alive and well, he was, and dropped off documents in Tim's mailbox and sometimes, inside magazines, inside his post box,
Mm.
post office box, inside the mail. Uh, so it it's interesting that I think that Thomas Cantwell, which is the name of the leaker, lived there, and was part of the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit,
Mm.
which there's several Majestic documents that are about the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. And just so everybody remembers, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit is not some, fig Newton of people's imagination that the National Archives have acknowledged that there really was an interplanetary phenomenon unit. It was part of the Air Force Office of Intelligence and Technical Scientific Directorate. But we've lost all the records. We can't find them. It's institutional memory, the hand waving BS that you might think they would say. I mean, the letter was signed by a guy in counterintelligence. I mean, you know, that's a red flag into itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how does the field of UFO crash retrieval research need to move forward? And what do you see as being important or novel areas to focus on for new researchers?
Well, how to move forward. I, I think more investigations of the existing crashes and more sensitivity to potential crashes,
Mm.
uh, and just more evidence gathering around that
Mm.
uh, is how I think the crashes should continue, because it's the data, but fundamentally, long ago, I realized that it's for me, it's all about the technology. Hey, they clearly understand gravity, and has the U.S. government or some corporation, Lockheed, what have you, figured out
Mhm.
gravity control, and or have they figured out fusion, um, and small compact fusion, and so this is where I've went, and actually, in my day job as the CEO of a company called Electric Fusion Systems, where we're working on small scale roller bag um, fusion, where you can actually direct to electricity burning lithium proton fusion. So you're burning lithium atoms and turning it into helium.
Mm.
So it's also what's called antineutronic, or no radiation, so to speak,
Mm.
without neutrons. So that's where I've morphed into. My focus is on the technology personally,
Mhm.
of how to do that.
That makes sense. Um, awesome. So, really cool work. Definitely recommend people check out Magic Eyes Only. You wrote a second book recently called The AI Ufologist.
Yeah.
What is this book about, and what inspired you to write it?
Um, well, I had done a lot of work with ChatGPT, training it for my fusion work. So we were feeding it, 50, 100 scientific papers about the nature of fusion and querying it and sort of giving it a brain corpus of knowledge to um, provide perspective on. And I decided, well, why don't I just do one for UFOs?
Mm.
So I took, you know, 10 books and some papers and just had it chew on it all.
And how did
Um,
you submit that? Just through PDFs, or how does that work? Like,
No, it's more complicated than that.
Uh,
It's you basically need um, you use WordPress and you use an AI engine and something called Pinecone, and you end up creating embeddings, uh, and it's it's the simple GPT of just here's a PDF, give me a response
mhm.
will work, but it's not really as robust and sophisticated as I was looking for.
Okay.
Um, so I did that and decided, well, let's ask it a question. What is the alien agenda? It's the first question that people ask, the public asks, why are they here? What do they want? Um, and in a minute, it generated 14 answers. It's the first question in the book.
Mm.
And I went through the list and said, oh, yeah, I got that. I got that. Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I was surprised, genuinely surprised. And then I asked it a second question and a third question. And 16 hours later, I was done. Um, I mean, there was editing and thoughtfulness, but
Yeah.
it sucked me in.
Mm.
And these are the questions that I was pondering. And it starts off with things that are pretty predictable,
Mhm.
and then it gets more, uh, I guess, robust or different of what its crop circles meanings and how do you what are the messages from the contactees on how do you solve the challenge of government disclosure and transparency with the need for military secrecy, and how do you tell the truth in a responsible way to the public,
Mm.
and the, if you were to try to implement the stuff that it was creating, oh, you could spend $100 million,
Mm.
um, and you need a lot of government support, and it's fascinating ex- exploration, and I'm probably going to do it again as I get more questions from other people, um,
Mhm.
and as the AI tools get better and better.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a very unique approach to studying in the field. And I wanted to ask you, correct me if I'm wrong. In the introduction, you mentioned this idea of something called UFO decks. And if I understand correctly, you'd like to have all of the research in theory on in, on UFOs from any time, right? Just a huge
Mhm.
database, everything, so that the AI can use that to draw from and answer questions like this. Do you Are you planning to do that? Um,
I think the answer is yes, maybe.
okay.
So I've started it, and I've used it as the sort of basis for this AI ufologist. Um, there's people who are still trying to resolve the challenge of copyrights.
Yeah.
Because I but if you're a nonprofit 501c3 with educational purposes, things like that, it's fair use. Um,
Mhm.
so I think the most likely scenario is because I probably will do more government documents, things in the public domain,
Mm.
because I have a huge collection of FBI files
Wow.
um, from all these different majestic people um, and other people in and around ufology, which is very rare. And I've been to the National Archives many times, and every time I go out, I walk out with a couple thousand pages of photographs
Mm.
or of photocopies.
Right.
Um, and scanning those and OCRing those and getting it all in place um, could be it's really important that it all be primary and be irrefutable and less speculation and
Right.
uh, try to make every effort to keep the garbage out and the good stuff in.
Yeah, that's valid, and I think it's a unique and innovative approach. And I know people are kind of opinionated about AI, but I believe in keeping an open mind. And a lot of things are like a double-edged sword, and I think in this sense, it's worth us seeing how it could help us, and that's kind of what you say in the introduction is, how could this help us continue to move this forward? And yeah,
Mhm.
so I read the book, and it's kind of funny what you shared of how it, because for me, the biggest takeaway was very similar. It made me think of possibilities. It's not like it proved anything new, right? But it made me think of things in a way I hadn't thought of before. And that was valuable in itself. I want to just run down my little highlight list here. Maybe listeners could glean some of it. These are the ones that stuck out to me. Okay. And then I want to just ask you for your thoughts on any of it. These are the hypotheses that I got that I hadn't really thought about before. Number one, ETs could be gathering materials here for terraforming other worlds, right? Genetic research could be to preserve their own species. They could be using us to test technology on, like we do to animals. They could be just documenting cosmic history. The idea that premature contact could lead to a loss of cultural identity for humans.
Yeah.
Um, the complications of laws, if ET visitation was normalized, like rights of ETs, legal status of their technology, government preparation of simulations of ET contact scenarios, which was a little bit of a yikes for me, but think about it. And then I got two more copyrights to discovered ET technology or artifacts that are found in space by private companies, and
Oh,
the last one, pandemics caused by ET organisms. So, like, I'm not really thinking about these kind of things, and it's interesting. So I don't know.
yeah.
Any thoughts on any of that?
Well, I mean, you did a great job of summarizing some of the novel insights, and everybody will come to the book in a different um, overlay of
Yeah.
understanding, and
Yeah.
so some people there'll be a different set of ahas, and that's
Yeah.
great. I mean, that was really the purpose of it. It's definitely it's very much a different UFO book than all the other ones that are out there, and I'm glad I did it. It's when you feel the energy go and say, "Let's do this," and you immerse yourself,
Mm,
and it's magic can happen.
mm.
So
Yeah, well said. So definitely worth checking out the Ufologist, and it'll help you think a little more. Guaranteed, I think, to at least give you one new idea you hadn't thought of before.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
not for everybody, but I've certainly thought about it a lot and studied it a lot, and there was new
Mhm.
stuff for me. So, moving on to the next part I wanted to talk to you about, Ryan, is wanted to ask you some questions about your father, Dr. Robert Wood.
Mhm.
And I wanted to briefly give a context to listeners, just quick summary. Your father, Dr. Robert Wood, worked in a senior capacity as an aerospace engineer at McDonnell Douglas for his entire 43-year career. And in his testimony, he has stated that he was involved in a project at McDonnell Douglas to study the propulsion systems of UFOs. He presented the scientific findings of this group to the officially government funded UFO investigation called the Condon Committees in the late 1960s. And he was financed by the CEO of McDonnell Douglas to secretly study remote viewing. Your father is widely regarded in the UFO field as one of the most experienced, credible, and well respected UFO
Mhm.
researchers and scientists.
Yeah,
So I just wanted to give that a little bit of a background because some people may not know. Um,
yeah. I add a little more color to things.
yeah.
You know, um, when I was 15 and Stan Friedman came to dinner,
Mm,
that's because Stan was working for my father for a certain length of time on this anti-gravity project. And the way that came about was that his boss came into his office and said, "What are we going to do for the retirement of General Schriever?" Uh, and and whimsically, he said, "Well, um, why don't we tell him how UFOs work and how they go to the stars?" And his boss said, "Yeah, sure, write that up, uh, do it." and so he was later making a presentation to McDonnell Douglas management, and they asked, "Well, what have you been doing for fun?" And he said, "Well, I've read like 50 UFO books, and there's only one question left." And they said, "Well, what's that? Are we going to figure out how they work before or after Lockheed does?"
Mm.
And then the management said, "Well, how much money do you need to do that?" And he said, "Well, I need $500,000, which is about $5 million today." Um, and that started the effort of doing efforts to try to change the speed of light and interviewing remote viewers and abductees and trying to do the nuclear physics. And they and it fascinated me because I was in high school. I was my senior project, I tried to mirror what he did
Mm.
on the pool table with lasers and setting up a Michelson-Morley interferometer and trying to create a huge magnetic field with capacitors and coils and stuff to see if I could change the speed of light. And this, in theory, Einstein's theory says you should be able to,
Mm.
but we didn't succeed. He didn't succeed. Um, so and the other thing about the Condon report presentation is that um, he made the report to Condon, and Condon was so pissed off that somebody had made a credible report and science and so forth, that Condon tried to get him fired,
Ah.
and went to his boss or boss's boss or whatever. This is written up in the MUFON Journal. And but he never got fired. So and he spent his career in rockets and um, radar,
Mm.
rockets and radar, Delta rocket program. He's a rocket scientist.
Oh.
But at one point, he's managing 500 people um, in. Government contracts ebb and flow in these defense contractors, and so uh, and he did a lot of what they call IR&D, or internal research and development program management. Um, and I think he retired while working on the space station um, in Huntington Beach, California.
Wow.
He's 95 today.
85, you said? Or
95 now.
95. Wow. Nice long
95.
life.
Although he did recently just have a stroke, which is very sad, and um, he's trying to recover from that mentally.
Mm. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about that, and I wish him the best. I wish you guys the best. And obviously, fascinating career in life, and a very credible and knowledgeable man. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that additional insight. So, forgive me for having to say a short paragraph here, but I want the listeners to have some context. I know I mentioned my interest in this to you earlier, and I know that you had said you didn't really have much, but I kind of just have like one question about it. But and so I'm going to just give the listeners a little context here. According to your dad, he met an individual named William Tompkins in 2009. Tompkins told him his life story, that he had also worked at Douglas Aircraft Company, and Tompkins asked your dad if he would help him publish his autobiography. Your dad agreed, and the book became called Selected by Extraterrestrials. It was published in 2015. And in this book, Tompkins describes his work related to UFOs, alien technology, interactions with Nordic looking extraterrestrials, Navy UFO reverse engineering programs that began in the 1950s that eventually created spacecraft carriers, and a secret space program with a base on the moon, Neil Armstrong seeing UFOs parked on the moon, and other secret projects. Your dad wrote in the prologue, quote, Bill's life story skirts the edge of believability, but in this case, I have total confidence that he is honestly telling the story as best as he remembers it. There's also been documentation in the book, as well as some of Michael Sahl's work, that has confirmed that William Tompkins worked where he did and when he said he did. And I know you told me that you, Ryan, were not involved in this project personally and have limited knowledge of it, but could you tell me, do you know what your dad's opinion was on William Tompkins' testimony, or is on William Tompkins' testimony.
I think that absolutely what you read there, he firmly believes. I mean, the reason why he believes it is that so many of the um, the people that he knew or the organizations, my father knew too,
Mm,
and so that the internal discussion between two employees of the same era. Um, Now, granted, McDonnell Douglas and Douglas Aircraft Company were big places, thousands of employees, but still, um, that's what I think convinced my father that um, yeah, this is not making it up.
mm,
It's credible, um, and that's what I believe. Um, I might also add that it's my grandfather on my mother's side was the vice president of Douglas Aircraft Company,
oh,
Schuyler Kleinhans, who was a um, famous airplane designer. He did a lot of different ran airplane design teams and uh, lots of interviews in the public press, all in the during the war and in the 50s and 60s. And he retired at the merger when Douglas Aircraft Company became oh yeah, McDonnell Douglas. Um,
mm,
and so I grew up in the thick of it
mm,
with Schuyler and my father and James Lip, which was uh, the husband of Schuyler's sister, who worked at Rand Corporation, which Rand, I think, is plugged into the UFO Enigma
mm,
and doing a lot of research there.
mm.
So, I mean, there was a lot of interesting discussions that happened. I bet, yes, I firmly believe that Tompkins is um, telling the truth the best he can remember him. So, uh, and I think that it, there was another. There's more than one astronaut that has said that I saw ETs on the moon. I think.
Yeah, I know Aldrin saw one while they were flying, and then they said it was like a reflection of the ship, which is like
Yeah.
ridiculous. But yeah, no. So okay, so you believe William Tompkins?
Oh yeah. Although I have honestly, I'd been focused on frontline aerospace at the time and
Yeah.
other jobs, and it had been sort of out of ufology since the end of the crash retrieval era.
Mm,
I'd say for at least 10, 12 years, I did little to nothing
okay.
about it. But I've reemerged with new vigor.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I'm happy to be here talking to you, and yeah, that's really interesting. And if it's just a game changer, and that's why I kind of focus on him as a witness so much, because it's almost like you were saying before, how the crash retrieval reality is like the next level beyond like UFOs are real. But then it's like there's a third level, which I don't know for sure. I mean, who would? Yeah, is there this whole other secret space program that's been out there? They got this whole operation, like, I don't know,
Mhm.
and it seems like there's some evidence to argue that, and I'm curious about that. And Tompkins was one guy who really just laid it out there, and he seems credible.
Yeah,
I mean, your dad
yeah,
worked, and that's what stuck out to me, is like your dad agreed to put his name on this, and it's like
yeah,
your dad is a very credible, respected person.
yeah,
So
yeah. There's a couple of stories where he used to go to the Douglas Library, which had a variety of they had a classified library, and start to do some research on UFOs.
mm,
Um, and then they sort of changed it and put the library over at the Aerospace Corporation in Pasadena. And so he used to go over there and start to do more research on various aspects of it, with his security officer. And then one day he came and all the files that he was looking at, that whole section was just gone. And
wow.
it's as if they decided, well, we don't want to have, you know, a certain level of people. I,
Yeah.
in my opinion, you know, as the son, is that he was never really briefed in on the truth.
Mm.
He was always a bright physicist, uh, hungering to be clued in, but they never did. Um, and that fundamentally, I believe that they've cracked gravity. I mean, the uh, retirement of Ben Rich, for example, from the Skunk Works,
Hmm.
and the highlight of, you know, we have the ability to take ET home now,
Mm.
and the testimony of Jan Harzan being there, hearing this,
Hmm.
hearing the conversations.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I firmly believe that, yeah, they figured out physics has been stalled um, for so long in, and I think that gravity was cracked because it was a huge effort to try to, and then it all sort of went nowhere or stopped in the late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating story, and if this really all comes out the way that it could, it's
Mhm.
just gonna just change the whole world. That's
Yeah.
why it's just so interesting to me. And so, yeah, I mean, Ryan, you came back at a great time. And so, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts on anything that might happen soon? And really, I guess one question I had is, how do you think we could get through disclosure without the public getting a sort of limited disclosure, where then it's like, oh, we need funding for surveilling these things and figuring out how they work, when that could just be a whole nother lie, and then we're just giving our money to like fake research because they already do have it figured out. How could we avoid that?
Yeah, that's a really tough question.
Mm.
Um, I'm I'm hopeful that this, you know, that's one of the questions in the AI ufologist, where, well, you need to tell people some truth. You need to explain why you're keeping some things withheld. We're not going to tell you how gravity works, because if we do, then, you know, the terrorists in Iran can whip over a 2,000-pound bomb over the Capitol building, and it's be disastrous.
Mm.
Um, or just, you know, go through the process of explaining, uh, and then holding, you know, regular briefings about that, um, and doing a limited confirmation. It's sort of, you're going to have to do a drip, drip, drip. People are going to be pissed. People are going to be, some are going to be satisfied, uh, and certain corporations are going to get um, their life handed to them. You know, as soon as I crack fusion, um, the value of oil in the Middle East is going to change. Or, you know, the car companies that are using ICE engines are going to use little fusion engines and electric motors. And now it will take time. It might take 10 years or something,
Mm.
but those stocks values are going to change. And it's the economic unknowns, it's the inflection points, it's the turmoil, um, that is hard to predict, that I think is holding the truth back.
Mm. Yeah, I guess that can't be underestimated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So
yeah, Ryan, thank you so much for coming and talking with me. It's been really nice to meet you, really nice to
yeah,
talk to you and hear your perspectives. I
yeah.
appreciate
Well,
it.
thanks, Anthony. It's been fun to share the details. Um, and thanks for reading the AI ufologist. You're the first one that's done a thorough and interesting interview dynamic with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth talking about for sure.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Anthony.